Thank you for tuning in to Psychology.is. I am your host, Nick Fortino. I'm so excited today to be in conversation with Dr. David Healy. Welcome, Dr. Healy.
Hi, Nick. It's good to be here, but it will be slightly better if you just call me David.
David it is.
Great.
So David Healy is a well-known psychiatrist. I have a strong feeling that many people who clicked on this video or pressed play are aware of David Healy. You're an author, professor, significant body of work focusing on many different aspects of the field of psychiatry, and you can fill in any gaps I have here in your introduction and wealth of knowledge. But I know that you focused a lot on the history of psychopharmacology and the pharmaceutical industry's influence on psychiatry. You're well known for being a vocal critic of certain practices within modern psychiatry, particularly the ways in which pharmaceutical companies market antidepressants and antipsychotic drugs. You've published many books, including the antidepressant era back in the 90s, the creation of psychopharmacology in the early 2000s, Let Them Eat Prozac, Mania, A Short History of Bipolar Disorder, Pharmageddon in 2012. You co-authored Children of the Cure in 2020. And these works, as I understand it, chronicle the rise of psychiatric medications and expose troubling conflicts of interest between academia and the drug industry. So I would love to begin by just asking you open-endedly, how did you get into all of this? Including how did you decide to become a psychiatrist, but then how did you become a critic of the field?
Yeah. Okay, well, I got into all of this because having trained in medicine, I knew I wanted to go into the mental health field, and I was very therapy-oriented. Now, when I say therapy-oriented, at this point it was Rogerian therapy that interested me. But I sort of thought I'd take a detour. There was an issue about how does the mind fit into the brain, and it looked like the pills that were beginning to come on stream might shed a bit of light on that. I mean, they were tools not just to treat people, but they were tools to look at, well, how does our brain work and how do we get a mind out of it? Now, fortunately, the pharmacology lab that I ended up in for 3 or 4 years was one where I had an opportunity to work on the serotonin reuptake system before the SSRI group of drugs came on stream. And that was extraordinarily fortunate because it meant that when these drugs came on stream, people working in the industry thought I was a good person to educate other doctors about what these drugs do. So they also saw me as one of them. I'm a person working on the serotonin reuptake system. I'm working in a pharmacology lab. So they were open about things and told me things that, most of my colleagues weren't hearing. It's hard to know whether the right word for me at the time was innocent or not, or whether, I was in this area because I was interested in the issues and taking in what most people on every side told me. Okay, now, in terms of working at what the SSRI group of drugs do, it was awfully clear very early on that there was nothing wrong with the serotonin system of people who were depressed. When I say early on, I mean the 1980s, it was clear. Okay, this is an older idea that had been raised in the 1960s, and by the 1980s, nobody thought there was anything wrong with the serotonin system in people who are depressed. So how do we end up with the idea that there is anything wrong with the serotonin system in people who are depressed? Well, that was something that came out of the marketing department of the pharmaceutical industry. It came out of SmithKline Beecham. And they invented the concept of the SSRI, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Now, there's nothing particularly selective about these drugs. They do work in the serotonin system, but they work on hundreds of other things as well. They aren't clean and pure drugs. And the other thing was, it was awfully clear that they were fairly weak as antidepressants. Uh, the industry people that I talked to made it clear that when they compared the newer SSRIs coming on stream during the 1980s with the older antidepressants, the older drugs always beat them. So the issue was, well, how do you bring a drug on the market that's going to be weaker and more expensive than the older drugs that are there? And the answer was easy. At the marketing department, we'll be able to sort this out. And in particular, the issues were, look, the money isn't in people who are severely depressed, which was a rare group of people who used to go into hospital to be treated with the older antidepressants or even ECT. The SSRIs didn't actually work for this group of people, but the money was people who were on the benzodiazepine group of drugs. And there was an opportunity opening up because during the 1980s, we were often concerned about people being hooked to the benzodiazepines. So the SSRIs could come on stream as the pill for everyday nerves that you didn't get hooked to. And one of the ways to sort of get that over to people was to call them antidepressants rather than anxiolytics. Because with benzodiazepines, nobody's going to believe that you could have an anxiolytic drug that you wouldn't get hooked to, but the antidepressants weren't linked to people being hooked to them. As it turns out, within a few years of the SSRIs being on at the market, there were more reports of people being hooked to each of them than there were to the entire group of benzodiazepines put together over the previous 20 years. So this was interesting. But one of the other things that was clear from working in a pharmacology lab was that there was a thing then called behavioral pharmacology, which was a bunch of people who had a background in behavioral science, looking at rats and gerbils and things like that, giving them pills and looking at what happened to their behavior. They did some looking at what was going on in their brain also, but they were intensely interested in the behavior of these animals. And that's one of the things we've lost completely. And the point behind that is, well, we got the SSRIs from people, therapists, giving them to patients during the 1960s. Giving the older drugs to patients during the 1960s and saying, well, when I see people on antidepressants, they talk about, well, they've got a distinct change in the transference reactions that I noticed. This was the period where people in the States in particular were very Freudian. So they talked about transference. And the therapists treating these people noticed this pretty early on, pretty quickly after the person went on pills. And this was nothing to do with the illness getting better. This was a change in the interaction between two people that was awfully obvious, okay? And it's that led to the SSRI group of drugs, because a man called Arvid Carlson, listening to doctors say this to him and looking at the pills where they said, we can see it most clearly with these pills and not with those pills, said, well, the ones you seem to be seeing it most clearly with act on the serotonin system, and the ones where you figure it's maybe not happening don't act on the serotonin system. So let's try and make a drug that's a pure serotonin reuptake inhibitor that doesn't work on the noradrenaline system, which was the other big kind of system back then that people figured played a role in all this. And Carlson's SSRIs were the group of drugs that came out of this. And a key point in it is he figured there's nothing wrong with the serotonin system in people who are depressed. These drugs are going to work on a normal serotonin system just like LSD does. And LSD, as we all know, can give some people a good effect, one that they're impressed with, pleased with, and other people a really bad effect, one that doesn't really suit them. Carlson's view was, the SSRIs are going to be pretty much the same. And this was back, the first SSRI came in the market in the early 80s. This is long before Prozac. But his view was early on, what we're going to find is there'll be a group of patients that are suited to them and other patients who aren't suited to them who could even become suicidal. What do they do working the serotonin system? Well, LSD opens the gates to sensory kind of perceptions. You see things more clearly, more vividly, you hear things in more detail. Everything looks and feels good from that point of view. SSRIs close the gate. They mute it. They tone things down. Things don't look as colorful, don't sound as clear, don't smell as clear. And, what people on them report is they're less reactive. Their feelings are damped down. Things that they might have noticed before, they either don't notice or they aren't as bothered by if they do notice. So that's what the SSRI group of drugs do. That's what we're trying to get them to do, which may be useful. It's not a cure. The kinds of conditions people get these drugs for usually clear up of their own accord in 8, 10, 12 weeks. So it's more a case of making them feel a bit more comfortable during that period of time. It may add a little bit to the rate at which you get better if you're feeling a bit more comfortable. It won't add to the rate at which you're getting better if you're feeling bad, okay, if you've actually become suicidal. And part of the problem we have at the moment is and the idea that there's lowered serotonin in people who are depressed has left doctors and all sorts of people are being told, look, these drugs can take about 6 or 8 weeks to work. The patient should be told that they aren't going to feel better quickly. So just keep taking the pills, which is a disaster. The answer really is that, you're going to, if they suit you, you're going to be able to tell people within a day or two that you're feeling more comfortable. And yes, this is the kind of thing that you've figured can help. And if you're not feeling that way, you really shouldn't be taking the pills for more than a day or two. You should be changed to a completely different kind of pill or a different kind of therapy. And one of the things that brought this home for me was we did a healthy volunteer study. And this was the end of the 1990s, to check and see was causar right, that people getting a drug that acts on the serotonin system would be able to spot an anxiolytic effect that was useful for them, and people working on some pill that didn't work on the serotonin system wouldn't spot that. They'd have a different thing that they were able to say was useful. So we took a bunch of doctors and nurses who were working in the mental health unit that I was in back then. And they were all keen to check out all these pills that they'd been using and things like that. The patients in the unit didn't know that the staff were going to be on these pills. But within a day or two, they were able to approach me and say, look, is that doctor on a pill? And is he on an SSRI? And the answer is he was. And it was an SSRI. The patients were better observers, better trained in handling mental health issues than the nursing staff and medical staff in the unit were. They'd been told these things take weeks to work. They put people on these drugs. They don't spot anything. The patients, even though they don't know you're on a drug, can spot, yep, he's on a drug. And it's not just patients in a mental health unit that can spot that. It's prisoners in jail. They can spot other people who've been involved with some kind of crime who end up in the prison wing that they're in. They can spot the people who are on the pills and the people who aren't. And your family and friends are able to spot these things as well and can say to you, look, this is suiting you, this is fine. Or, no, you've had a change of personality and we're not sure it's all that helpful. So this isn't the kind of thing anybody's been told. But if you don't get a feel good, a chill